I want to get your thoughts. So one of the things that has become clear here as Republicans seem to be seizing upon what they believe is Democratic foot dragging here, that there was an attempt to make this a last-minute surprise. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think for anyone who's watching her and listening to her, she's a hero. She has so much courage. She is speaking from the heart. She's reliving the worst moments of her life for the world. She's shown extraordinary strength, and her testimony is powerful. Okay. And so I don't think what the Republicans are trying to do is it's not having any effect, because she's just telling her story. And she told everyone that she wanted to stay confidential. This was not something she wanted to do. She didn't want to have to be public. But as time kept moving and he kept being named as a potential Supreme Court justice, she felt she had to come forward and give that testimony. And so
Senator, how do you explain some of the, I guess, the problems with her testimony? People may feel that she's given a very compelling account of what she remembers. On the other hand, she has supplied names of people she says were there, all of whom say they don't recollect anything like that. Where does that leave you in terms of reasonable doubt? I know it's not a court of law, but does that give you any pause?
No, and if the Republicans wanted to get to the bottom of this, wanted the truth, they would have allowed, and this president would have called for a full FBI investigation. The fact that the FBI hasn't been able to complete their background check to actually ask the other people who were at this event, not even to have Mark Judge be cross-examined, to have him testify under oath. It's outrageous. It's absurd. And what the Republicans are making her do by just this he said, she said, it shows how improper this hearing actually is. They should be allowed the corroborating witnesses who have relevant information to give. The fact that she told her therapist 5 years ago, her husband 5 years ago, several friends before he was actually named to be a Supreme Court justice really goes to her integrity, it goes to her honesty, and goes to the believability of this story. And so I don't think they're looking for the truth. And so the fact that they don't remember or don't deny it, well, none of them testified under oath yet. So no, that's not persuasive at all.
Speaking of looking for the truth, Senator, and this afternoon you'll have the opportunity to hear from Judge Kavanaugh. Do you have an open mind? Is there anything he could say in this testimony that would convince you that he is innocent of these charges?
Well, I've heard his testimony. He's actually went on Fox News and told people that he was focused at the time on going to church and focused on the time on studying and having friends. And I think the things he's actually has said, that he's never not remembered the night before from drinking, is in opposite to what other people have said. The fact that his college roommate said he'd come home drunk, that he'd come home belligerent. The fact that his best friend, Mark Judge, wrote a whole book about blackout drinking and drinking to excess. I think that undermines his credibility.
Senator, as you know, there are other accusers who are not a part of this hearing today, but their stories are out there. Do they help or hurt Dr. Ford's story?
I didn't quite hear your question, but I think you said that there are two other women who have come forward with, I believe, credible allegations of other sexual impropriety, and they should be investigated by the FBI. They should be allowed to testify, and then corroborating witnesses for each of these should also be allowed to testify.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.